Well, welcome, Mel. Thank you
Hi,
so much
Lisa
for
Hansen.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. You've been one of those people that I've been following for a while,
Oh,
and I reached out a while back, and time just passes, and I was reviewing all of my plans for this year and last year, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, I have to reach back out to Mel to see what's going on with her.
yes.
And the timing was right. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me in conversation today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much. I'm excited.
Yeah.
And I love that we did not prep at
No,
all. No
no,
pre-questions. Let's just chat.
yeah, it's supposed to be kind of a really loose conversation. I
Mhm.
and really organic. I try not to be too scripted in this project because I feel like I'm really, really heady and logical in all other aspects of my life. So this I just
Right.
want to flow and just be
I love
natural.
it. The
Yeah.
best conversations happen like that. So I'm ready. Let's
Okay,
do it.
cool. Well, let's tell all the people that are watching just who you are. So I'm going to do a brief introduction, and
Mhm.
then I'm just going to get started off with one kickoff question, and you can just run with that and tell us as much as you like about yourself. So
Yeah.
today I'm talking with Mel Gabriel. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of Caribbean Lookbook, which I believe is currently in its 13th year. Is that correct? Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Been
And
a
she,
quiet 13 years though, but yeah.
but still, 13 years, yeah, of
13 years.
presence.
Hmm.
Um, and that's how I found Mel through the Caribbean Lookbook, which is a really awesome digital publication. And she'll tell you more about it later. But she's also the producer at Middle Face Media, and she is currently located in Port of Spain, Trinidad.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I'm going to just kick off the conversation with um, the vision that I read for Caribbean Lookbook. And I really resonated with this because this has been something that has been near and dear to my heart too. And what I read in my research was the lookbook creates a space, a community, not just to highlight Caribbean designers and artisans, but also to help them thrive. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the inception of Caribbean Lookbook and sort of what it was like, what happened, and where you are right now?
The first day, I think, if I remember correctly, of coming up with this idea, I was in London. I was taking like a sabbatical or something, and I went to, I think it was Camden,
Mhm.
and I saw so many people with just unabashed personal style. They didn't care who was looking at them or whatever. Like everybody was just doing their thing. And at that time, Sex and the City was really popping and all that good stuff. So I was binge watching that. And I thought it would be so great if we could have the same kind of reverence for these foreign designers, for our local designers rather, that we have for foreign designers. Because Caribbean Lookbook started as Trinidad Lookbook.
Mhm.
And I wanted to create a space where people would feel more enthused about local fashion and get them wearing it more and dressing up more and buying local designs. So I started it as a style blog, and it very quickly morphed into a proper fashion publication, because at that time as well, I think there were two magazines, well, newspaper magazines, I think Scorch and ET&T or something. And when they went to events, they would highlight outfits from the event, but in a embarrassing way.
Mm.
It was like, oh God, what is she wearing? What is this leopard tights? Da da da. And I didn't like that because I don't like embarrassment and bacchanal and them kind of thing. I find like, how can we use people who are dressing well and use them as a guide for people who need to know better? So that's how the style blog started, just highlighting people with their personal style, people who weren't afraid to really dress up and dress well and put pieces together. And then the conversation very quickly continued into that realm of local fashion and blossom into Caribbean fashion.
Mm.
Yeah.
So were you out there taking the photos? Were you going to the events taking the photos, or did you have like collaborators? How did you do this?
But at the beginning, for the at least for the style bits, at that time, Trini Scene and Trini Jungle Juice and like all these event photography pages
Oh
were
yeah.
major.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a matter of pulling images from them and aggregating that content. But then when Fashion Week came up, I would go to Fashion Week, and Twitter was very new at that time. So I was live tweeting the shows and posting pictures on Twitter. So everybody was like, what's going on? And my first collaborator was Mark Gelano, who at that time was a very young, self-taught photographer, and he was so good. And I asked him, I'm like, Mark, would you shoot our first like Fashion Week coverage? And he's like, yeah. And but Mark is like, he was popping at that time. So everybody was like, what is going on? Like these images are great and everything. And we released all the runway footage like kind of immediately at the same night. So I remember mailing saying to me, she was like, you know, I showed my collection and a friend of mine in Toronto messaged me and said, I saw your collection, it's so great. And I asked him, how did he see it? He's like, it's on this website called Trinidad Lookbook. And I'm like, yay! You know, just that's the kind of reach we wanted at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, and we got it like kind of right away.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that conversation sparked in that space and having more people talk about Caribbean fashion, having more people buy it. That was the aim, and it's been working.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you were in Camden. What were you doing prior to this Project Caribbean lookbook? Were you always into fashion? What was your...
Not I before Caribbean Lookbook, I started at the YMCA as an outreach facilitator. I used to do a lot of advocacy work, social work, particularly in the realm of sexual and reproductive health and rights.
Mhm.
So I've been an activist more or less my entire adult life. And then I moved from there into corporate communications, PR and marketing, went back into social work for a little bit, and then took off to London for a few months.
Aha.
Yeah.
And so how it seems as if how has your previous work in social work and activism sort of informed the path of Caribbean Lookbook?
That's a great question because I've been reflecting on that so much recently in my quiet time because I realized so much of what I do with Lookbook and what I've been doing with Lookbook has been more of a social enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I care more about the designers being represented and known and highlighted than I care about advertising dollars to my detriment. You know, like
Yeah.
I just want people to know about the people who doing great work and give them money.
Yeah.
And you know, whatever that ends up looking like, I want to create systems that support their work, help them to, like you said earlier, thrive, help them to get out into international markets. So whatever I can do in that space, that's all I'm focused on.
So
The
you
aim is always buy Caribbean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've been in the digital space for quite a while.
Yeah.
And so how has that changed? Because in publishing, digital publishing has pretty much wiped print publishing off of the map. I mean, I think perhaps that's where we're heading. The majority of print magazines, print newspapers are really kind of folding. There
Yeah.
are some things that I see that are very, very unique, which I think you may fit this niche in that it's a really small print, just a really core market and almost precious, a very, very
Mhm.
precious offering.
Mhm.
And so where do you see Caribbean Lookbook in the digital and public publishing space?
Well, in 2012, at the beginning of 2012, we launched our first print issue.
Mhm.
And at that time, I gave an interview talking about how everything was so digital and so online that I wanted to create something that's very tactile, something that could be a keepsake, something that you could open and tear pages out of and stick it on your wall or something. Because I don't like, I don't like Kindles. I don't read from Kindles and all that. Like I like physical books. I have stacks. I like to feel the pages. I like to smell the pages. It's all that for me. I'm a very touchy-feely person. So I wanted to create something that we could hold on to, especially when it comes to cataloging and chronicling fashion in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
Um, but I also recognize that that happened before I was ready for it to fully be realized. I did not have the capacity to maintain it at that time. And also the industry was very, very new in terms of publishing about local fashion
Mhm.
entirely. Like that was our entire focus. So I don't think people knew what to do with us really. Right. So then we went back into the digital space and just kind of stayed there for a bit. And now we're looking to get back into print, but in a meaningful, intentional way.
Yeah. Yeah. That really does, I think, go with what I've been seeing. I also follow a lot of culinary magazines,
Mhm.
uh, publications that are really dealing with a very specific set of information or data that they're trying to present. And so, who would you say is the audience for Caribbean Lookbook?
The thing with lookbook is more of a psychographic than a demographic.
Mm,
It's a, a type of person who is a blend of like aspirational things, but also inspirational things, and but also lived experiences. It's
mhm,
a person who likes to travel, but even if they can't afford to travel, would like to travel,
mhm,
would like to dress from their wardrobe or shop their wardrobe or buy designer pieces. And they're being very mindful about how they engage with the world, how they engage with Caribbean culture and Caribbean lifestyle, and how that translates into their personal style.
mhm,
That's the type of person I'm talking to. And that's the type of person that usually responds to our content, because you can't narrow it down to, if you try to narrow it down to like who's the fashion consumer, most people tend to feel like, oh, it's only somebody from the West, or it's only somebody who study abroad, or it's only somebody with money or whatever. Like, it's not that at all. The same event I went to last night, these are like young urban youth with the most impeccable personal style I've seen in such a long time. And and they own it. You could tell
mhm,
they really like put their effort into getting dressed. They're very intentional about it, and they just want to represent their own personalities. And you can't tell them anything about anything else, because this is what they like. And if they find a designer within that space and within that level of joy for them, they'll lean into it. And
mhm.
that's what we want to push as much as possible.
You make an interesting point. How has it changed, the scene, the people, over the years that you've been documenting and reporting? What have you seen?
It's one big circle, to be
Mm,
honest. Like we will have a ton of ebbs and flows in the industry. 1 minute, everybody's talking about fashion and everybody's buying and everybody's into it and going to shows. And the next minute, it's kind of quiet and you don't know what's going on. So you kind of have to keep reaching out to like, hey, are you working on anything new? Hey, what are you doing? That kind of thing.
Right.
So because I want designers to stay top of mind in the consumer's mind. I don't want people to get bored of fashion or to feel like it's inaccessible at any point. Um, but the designers are also having a hard time. I mean, pandemic notwithstanding, they were having a hard time before.
Oh.
Even just trying to market themselves or trying to position themselves appropriately, trying to access the international market. It has not been easy. And having systems and policies in place just to support that growth has been a long road. Different governments switching out and trying to create programs and incentives and all that, but sometimes it misses the mark. So if you're a designer and you're not intentional about your work and your own growth, and you're not like getting to the bag on your own, it's gonna be even harder. So I encourage everybody to collaborate as much as possible, reach out to people as much as possible, try to figure out how to get into these spaces that as a designer you might think you can't access, but it's very easy if you know who to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in what I hear you talking about, I think is a network, right? A network of people, a network of industry professionals that could collaborate and form almost like the CARICOM of fashion, like,
Yeah.
that would be awesome. And I think that in talking with, I also interviewed Mei Ling, and we talked about just how Caribbean fashion is perceived as opposed to like European fashion, Europe, and the status of European fashion now, which I'm going to reserve my opinion on that.
Right.
But for myself, I really prefer to focus on what is being produced in the Caribbean, because in my mind, it's so much more authentic and representative of the culture and the people, as
Yeah.
opposed to something that's being produced in lands far away that have no connection to who we are, who we were, and where we're going, except this kind of massive mass production fervor. It just feels like a huge fervor. And I think
Yeah.
in the Caribbean, we have an opportunity to do something differently. The designers have an opportunity to do something differently, in that there may be a slower pace. But then you mentioned entering the market, how difficult it can be to access markets.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you speak to, you mentioned designers having difficulty even before COVID, but can you speak to what you perceive as the status of the industry now?
I think the baseline for Caribbean fashion and for people to appreciate it, it boils down to actually cherishing what is Caribbean culture.
Mm.
We will never appreciate Caribbean fashion if we don't appreciate Caribbean culture.
Mm.
We're so quick, and I'm using we loosely, but we're so quick to give it away for a little bit of recognition,
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, okay, this what we have here at home is very dope. Let's cultivate it.
Yeah.
Let's see how we can make it work. People want to talk about, oh, support local, support local, support local. And yes, please support local. But supporting local always has to come with like a ton of conditions. They expect everything to be pristine and perfect and all that. And in fashion, you have the basics. You want the finishing to be good, and you want your clothes to hold up and all that. But the Caribbean has this very lovely, like, a lovely element of slow fashion
Mm-hmm.
that works for us.
Mm-hmm.
Mailing stuff, like she could produce ready to wear pieces, but she also is heavy on the bespoke
Mm-hmm.
aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Young from the cloth, he would make pieces ready to wear, but they're one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
So you could manipulate it in such a way that anybody could wear it and make it their own. But that's intentional work. That is slow fashion. That's ethical, sustainable, handmade craft. And if we don't appreciate handmade, ethical, sustainable craft at the cultural level,
Mm-hmm.
we can't expect that to translate into clothes. We can't expect local people, Caribbean people to appreciate it to the extent that it needs to be appreciated. So now when we try to have Caribbean designers access the international market, they're thinking, oh, well, I need to be able to produce 9,000 pieces for
Right.
it to make sense. But no, you don't. Ashling Camps is a Trini, went to Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
is still making slow fashion, ethical, handmade, taking her time making pieces. She has a system in place where you cannot rush her pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And she's doing really well. She has an excellent trajectory of growth that I am always excited to watch. But the problem here is that we always like everything that's foreign,
Yes.
and foreign is king. So when you try to compare foreign to a local piece, people will quicker buy Shein
Mm-hmm.
than Mei Ling
Mm-hmm.
because they feel like, oh well, it will. And Shein, I guess, probably the worst thing to buy if you want to buy like a sustainable piece of fashion and have something that would last for years.
Yeah.
So if we don't appreciate our people and our makers, then it's not going to translate well at all for the industry.
Where do you think it begins, the change in what I think you may be talking about is an education almost, or where do you think that development of appreciation could come from?
It's
Where
all
do we
hands on
start?
deck. It's all hands on deck. I mean, this is behavior change we're talking about, and that is never overnight. That is slow and steady. Campaigns for behavior change usually take 10 years before you see any type of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you're talking about the fashion industry in the Caribbean landscape where the majority of people tend to feel like, oh, fashion is, like fancy thing, that's highfalutin thing. Like we don't know that bougie thing. We don't know about that or whatever. I could just wear my merino and my pants and call her George. But I think, and what I've been trying to do with the book is focus it more on personal style, make it more about the individual, and then tie it back to local designers and local makers, showing people like, hey, you could still wear this denim jacket if you want to, but look at this denim jacket that Mark Eastman makes. And, you know, this is really cool and it's made by somebody right here. So it's more about, for me, talking up the idea of your personal style as a factor of your Caribbean lifestyle and what that looks like.
And in thinking about Caribbean lifestyle, I've been noticing something, maybe it existed before, but I've been noticing something that's been happening a lot more now in my mind. Maybe it's again, maybe it existed before, but I became aware of it recently. Where so I'm Jamaican,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of people moving into the Jamaican space now, like a whole heap of people.
Mm-hmm.
Artists, musicians, just regular people, everybody is visiting Jamaica. The same thing is happening in Trinidad. Everybody's in was at Carnival this last year. And
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder about tourism, the culture of coming to the islands to party and
Mm-hmm.
then returning home. But I always think of it as sort of like a this may be controversial, but because tourism does brings money, right?
Yeah.
But in some ways, I think it's like a colonization. It's like people are coming down there, they're absorbing the culture, which is awesome. It's amazing. And then they're going back to where they come from, and somehow they're incorporating it and commercializing it and putting their own spin on it.
Yeah.
And it speaks to what you were talking about before. It's kind of like this virtuous cycle. It's ironic in that, they will go and they will develop something and then sell it back to us.
And we'll buy it.
And we'll buy it.
The one time I saw any kind of real pushback was when Michael B. Jordan tried to do the Juve rum. Right now, and bless his heart, because he was the face of it. Yeah, it's his brand, but he also had a partner who was a Trini foreign national. And then you start to see in that conversation, you start to see the levels at which people are willing to accept certain things. Because if his partner was a real Trini, like a Trini, living here, then it might have been received differently than a foreign national who has not been home in how many ever years, or who didn't grow up here properly or anything like that. So that vulturism, if we want to call it that, of the Juve aspect, it was kind of rabid in terms of the response, and people weren't having it. And that's the first time I saw everybody kind of band together and was like, nah, we're not doing this. Change your name, do something else or whatever. But it's so easy once you have like a little bit of island in here to say like, oh, well, we're doing this. I saw a story where some people, they came for carnival, foreign nationals, they came for carnival, they went to Fete Yard, Lost Tribe had their event, Fete Yard, and then they went back to New York and they're trying to do Fete Yard in New York, and it's like, that is not okay, like this is a whole idea that we developed here and all that, and how do you just transplant it? You're not even talking to tribe, you're not even talking to Lost Tribe. How does that work? And it's the ease with which people can just come and pick up something and go with it and do what they want and then be like, hey, look at what we did. And it's like, nah, we did that. Like, what are you talking about? But we also, going back to cherishing the culture, we don't cherish it enough to stand up for it. It's one thing to go to events and go to stick fighting and go to whatever, but are you defending the culture to the point that it needs to be defended? And not enough people are doing it. Jamaicans are way better at protecting brand Jamaica than I feel like the rest of the Caribbean is. You cannot talk to a Jamaican about Jamaica. You can't tell them one thing and they won't allow it, which is what I love. And especially in Trinidad, I find like we're so easygoing with like, nah, it's fine. Because it's almost as if, not that we don't care, but we just want to show everybody love and give everybody love and receive love from everybody. So it doesn't occur to us that, oh, this person might be digging out your eye if you just give away everything.
Yeah.
So we'll get there, but it will take some time still. It's a lot of behavior change and culture change. And then culture eats strategy. So no matter what you try to do, it's going to be a mess if you're not impacting the culture in a way that's significant enough.
And there is then also the question of the governments.
Well,
yeah.
I want to say they mean well, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I really don't, because it's creative work, right? Creative and cultural work, and what people tend to forget is that cultural work does not have the same essence of, normal business. It's cultural work is social work. This is the work where lives are impacted at a very cellular level, because this is why people like to read and they create entire worlds in their brains. This is why somebody could just start to sketch something and then they turn into Picasso like 5 years on the road. It's because there are spaces created to harness that kind of potential and that kind of talent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is deeply personal, social work. And we don't see it like that because we're thinking everything has to make money and everybody has to have a business mind. And that's not how it works at all. What the business-minded people can do is create systems that will facilitate the growth of the creative and cultural sectors. But they're so focused on the money part that they're not trying to make the systems. They just don't understand why it's not making money.
Mm-hmm.
Any investor, any funding agency, anything like that, they're like, okay, what is the ROI? What are the guarantees? There are no guarantees. Because you're making something, especially if it's a maker and a creative person, like a truly creative person, they're making something that's literally coming out of their heart.
Yeah.
They're not thinking necessarily about, all right, I'm gonna make this bottle and I'm gonna sell it for $10, but I need to make sure it only costs me $1 to make. All right, let's reverse engineer it. They're not thinking like that. They're thinking, how can I make this beautiful piece that flows when the wind blows this way and it folds a kind of way here, but it covers, half the face. They're trying to make a statement,
mm-hmm.
and everybody else just trying to make money. So it's not gonna, because we have that, we're banging our heads together and it's not making any sense.
And I think again about the status of fashion that's coming out of the European fashion houses and how they're impacted by the groups that now own them and the drive to make money.
Yeah, but they also have a bigger market.
Yes.
Because if you look at even the way like the Instagram algorithm works, right? I'm in Trinidad, there is a set amount of people that I'll be able to reach organically. Unless I start a boost and all that, but organically, this is the market. So
mm-hmm.
also, if Lookbook was based in New York, the market would be exponential. And that's the difference between like the European markets, the North American markets to the Caribbean market. We're still operating in this little leeward-windward chain. And we have to kind of band together and boost each other up before we could even think to ask for boosts outside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Luckily we have this massive diaspora, but they don't always know what's going on. So we're trying to tell them, we're trying to highlight people, but there are a ton of Caribbean designers who are also foreign nationals who can more readily get the exposure, but everybody needs to kind of have the same conversation at the same time and mean it.
So you mentioned Fashion Week. Is there a Fashion Week in Trinidad?
There are a number of fashion events. It's not an official fashion week. I know recently there was Port of Spain Fashion Week, but that has been on a smaller scale than what the previous Fashion Week TT thing was. I mean, I'd love if there could be a proper fashion week, but I think Port of Spain Fashion Week is the closest that's coming to it so far. There's another one I saw recently, but it was like Fashion Festival of TNT or some like a play on the whole Fashion Week name, but I haven't been seeing anything about them. And I'm also now kind of re-entering that whole fashion marketing and publishing space because I took a break. Well, I had to take a break, but now I have to kind of go digging and looking because if anybody has to report on it, it's me. Yeah. And so it's gonna take some time, but we'll find out what's going on.
Yeah. I know that they had recently. There's something that they market in Jamaica called Caribbean Fashion Week, which was originally done by Pulse. I don't know if Pulse is still doing it.
I haven't heard anything from them in a while.
Mm.
And they've been like over 20 years going strong.
Yeah.
Um, they get a lot of great press and all that. Now it's my thing is again, it's Jamaica.
Hmm.
Jamaica itself is a tourism product, and they're great at that. Grenada is coming up in that space, and Barbados in particular. They are being very intentional about their tourism
Hmm.
marketing. My thing is, how can we incorporate fashion tourism more meaningfully into that space? Because people talk all the time about, beaches and sun and sand and all that, and it's great. But blend the fashion in too now, because we have so many designers all over the Caribbean who are doing good work. I
Yeah.
mean, there are some designers who could do better, but the designers who are doing good work, you work with them, incorporate them.
Hmm.
Food tourism is picking up all over the place. There's no reason fashion shouldn't do the same.
Agreed. Agreed. So you have a quote on your Twitter page that really struck me. I was looking at it on my phone on your profile, and then I noticed that there were words above your handle. And so I was like, oh, what's this? And the quote is, and this is a quote from you, and it is, "We know the weight of stories contained in our scars, the waiting breath, the sighs that shift like sand, and even the falling glance. All is made lighter in the telling." Maybe that is what survival is, knowing the weight of things.
Yep.
You want to tell us a
It's
little bit
been,
more?
it's been an interesting 3 years. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2020, December 2020. And then did surgery. I had a double mastectomy, did chemo, radiation coming up, so it's been an interesting journey. What I realized, and all of this is part of the reflection I've been doing in terms of, because for some reason your mortality being threatened, it forces you to really examine not just your life, but the the work you pour into.
Right.
I don't want to do work that is not meaningful. I don't want to do work that is useless or doesn't serve anybody. Um, and more so than now, more than ever, I want to be very careful about what I put out, who I support, the kind of conversations I entertain, that kind of thing. Um, and the scars I'm referring to in that quote were partly, my scars post surgery, but also battle scars of having to be a creative entrepreneur in the Caribbean, because that in itself is not easy. That comes with a fair amount of challenges and lumps, and you kind of just have to move through it the best way you can.
Have you had, as a creative entrepreneur, have you had a support system, or has it just been you having to fortify yourself and move forward?
I've had a number of support systems over the years. With my cancer journey, I definitely have a core tribe, and they've been great, like forever. These are my people, my real people.
Mhm.
But with the lookbook journey, the the support systems, they shift over the years. It depends on where people are with at their like career journey, or where they are on their creative journey, and how they fit into the whole ecosystem of this creative endeavor. Um, and I've been grateful for every single person who came along for the ride. I think I know for sure Lookbook was ahead of its time. I think when it started, like I said before, like people didn't really know what to do with it, and a lot of people kind of interned or helped out or reached out and like wanted to do a shoot or wanted to do a thing or wanted to style and used it as a launch pad for their own careers in different areas within the creative industry, which was always part of the plan, and that's great. So if I could keep being that for people, and if Lookbook could keep being that for people, that would be great too. But the support system will always, it will always shift, it will always change, and not necessarily in a negative way, but I've learned to expect change more than anything else and learn how to kind of roll with it. There's something blocking your screen. I don't know if that's on purpose.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. Was that there for a long time? I hope. Here's my notes. Thanks for letting me know that. So, so on this journey that you've been on for these past 3 years, what are the things that you turn to for balance, for wellness, the things that you really, that ground you?
Well, the things that ground me and the things I was able to turn to were completely different, because I don't know if it's God's plan that I was diagnosed with cancer like right during the pandemic when nobody could go anywhere anyway. So it kind of worked out, but also didn't work out. It gave me a lot of time to think. I was by myself a lot because pandemic and doing chemo, your immune system is very compromised. So I couldn't be around people like all willy-nilly, right? So I had a lot of alone time. So a lot of reading, a lot of napping because you have to recover, and just a lot of thinking about, you know, my journey, where I came from, where am I heading to next? What does that look like? But balance for me, ideally, would be going down the islands to a cottage and sleeping for a week, or just like going in the beach. I couldn't go to the beach while I was doing chemo, but now I'm like, yeah, I just need to be away for a minute, rejuvenate, think, plot, plan, whatever, come back and just see everything with fresh eyes. I'm an emotional napper. So
what is that?
As soon as I'm overwhelmed or like anxious about anything, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a nap and it will be okay. You know, the problem might still be there when I wake up, but I'll be a little bit more clear. I could deal with it like more level, with a more level head. So I nap every chance I get. I also don't sleep very well at night, so the naps help. And another way I find balance now, especially, I'm making time to read. I used to be an avid reader when I was younger, and I found myself only reading like business books and articles and that kind of thing. And now I'm like, I would like some fiction, you know. So I'm finishing up When We Were Birds finally, and then I'm moving on to like a couple other things. I just have a whole stack, like I said, and I'm gonna make my way through all of them.
Awesome. I
would like to go out and wine low time to time, but yeah, that's balance.
Like to what? Say that again.
Wine down low, go to a party and just dance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Very helpful.
Yeah, the movement part of it. It's like the movement therapy.
Definitely.
Yeah. And working out?
Yeah, gym for me that's my therapy. I mean, therapy is also therapy, but but I also go to the gym, and it's like just to blow off steam and all that. It's very good.
And so when you think about digital wellness, though, are you incorporating some protocols with how you're interacting with your work, with online, and because your work is online? How are you managing?
Yeah. Very carefully. Because I'm constantly online. If I And not just when I'm posting or writing or whatever, but I'm always looking for something. I'm always researching. I'm always looking for the next designer from the Caribbean, somebody we haven't spoken about before. I'm always planning something. And then I'm getting a lot of information coming at me all the time. And for me, I hate notifications. So one way is my phone is usually on Do Not Disturb, which is why I tell people message me first because you're not going to get me if you just try to call.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have no notifications for Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, nothing. So nothing pops up on my phone because I just don't like being startled by anything, really. And then my my Twitter feed and my TikTok feed, everything is so highly curated that I'm not seeing anything that doesn't serve me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my For You page on TikTok is full of happy stories, happy like humankind stories, fashion things, food, like healthy eating, decor, and travel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and fashion girlies like getting dressed and that kind of thing. That's it. I don't see no kind of bacchanal. I don't see no kind of rabs. I don't see nothing that's negative. Few and far between, I should say, you know, because your For You pages, it should always show you whatever. But Twitter, especially for me, is so curated that I only see the things that matter to me. And I love that for me. And
So
that's a plan. That's very intentional.
yeah, you took the time to do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you really grateful for most now in this moment?
I feel like saying life is a cliche. Like I'm always grateful for life. I feel like that's such a lazy answer. Um, More than anything, I'm grateful for discernment.
Mm.
That's
Can
a
you
big one for me.
share
I
more of that?
Yeah, I in my past life or my past lives, I'm a recovering people pleaser, and I did not always know when was the appropriate time to, I think, stand up for myself or to insist on certain things. Because I just want everybody to be cool and happy and have a good time and, you know, just be peaceful. But that was at the expense of my own well-being. And that's done now. So where the discernment comes in is recognizing who and what requires my efforts, and who and what requires my attention, and recognizing that it is also okay for other people and places and spaces to not receive it from me. And that they'll receive it from somebody else and they'll be fine. But I don't have to carry that and it's okay.
That's a hard place to reach, isn't it?
It's hard, but it's so lovely.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a soft, pillowy space to just lie down and enjoy yourself. Like it's great. It took a minute to get here, but it's lovely.
Now that you're there, it's nice.
Yep. Yeah. But this is also like mindful work. You have to be very, very intentional daily about crafting this space for your own well-being and making sure you stay there. You might step out of bounds ever so often because of history or, you know, some kind of intoxicating idea of nostalgia. But at the end of the day, you recognize like, oh no, I made this little soft space for a reason. Let me go back in there and cuddle up a little bit. Because your body responds to things, right? And your body has all these memories and it manifests physically and mentally as soon as you interact with a certain space or a certain person and it tells you, nope, we're not doing this, remember? Like come back into the safe space and just relax. And but you have to do it's everyday kind of work. it's very easy to fall out of that space. It's very easy to lose yourself and forget why you've created that space in the first place. But I think once the work is being done, I'm big on shadow work. I love asking myself difficult questions. I
Mm.
love, having difficult conversations. For me, especially with my friends and people I care about, like, let's have the difficult conversation. Even if we end up yelling or whatever, I hope we don't, but even if we do, let's get it out. Let's really try to understand each other and move from there. I love a difficult conversation. Not everybody could do it though. People say they love difficult conversations, but they're not really ready to receive what the other person might be about to say. You
Right.
know, so for me, it's just a matter of deciding I like you enough to make the effort. I care about your well-being as much as I care about mine. Maybe 1% less than I care about mine. I care about my well-being above all, but I also care about yours enough to show you the respect of having that difficult conversation, because I want not just you to be okay or me to be okay, I want us to be okay. And I like to believe that translates into my work as well.
That sounds really like a loving, respectful relationship, with others.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as the
Um,
aim. Yeah.
yeah. Um, you talked about shadow work. So I'm also a yoga and meditation teacher. And so the shadow work is something that I think a lot of us try to avoid at all costs, and really should not be approached. I think you really have to have a guide through this work. I mean, it at least in the beginning to sort of set the foundation so that you can navigate without being swept away. Because we are so the depths of us, you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
that we could probably get lost if we don't have support, you know. And
Yeah.
so I know we've touched on support before, but in with the lens of shadow work and just really delving into ourselves and the truth of ourselves, can you speak to any revelations or enlightenments that you've had?
I I was able to recognize when I was being driven by ego versus spirit. I was making certain decisions based on ego, and now I'm able to figure out, like, it will come up for me and I could recognize like certain triggers or certain telltale signs. I'm like, oh, okay. So now I don't make decisions off the bat anymore. I wanna, because I'm usually very impulsive. I'm like, yeah, let's just do it. I'm like, okay, no, hold on. Wheel and come again. We're not doing that no more. So I sit with it and I say, okay, well, I'll think about it and I'll give myself that time,
Yeah.
because that's the people pleaser part of me. Like, I
Mhm.
just want to help and I want, yeah, let's do it. And
Yeah.
no. So now I'm like, all right, well, let me think about it. And I'll hit you back in a day or two. Let me really consider what I'm agreeing to or what I'm trying to help you with and what that would look like. And make sure I'm doing it from a good place, because yeah, there's strategy, especially when you have a brand that could further the career of somebody who's now starting off or whatever. There's that ego that says, like, yeah, I put you on, I did this for you and da da da. And then you go back to spirit and spirit says, what is your why? Why
Mhm.
are you, why are you doing this work? Not just why are you trying to help this person, but why are you doing this work? And what does that look like in the long run? Are you doing this for some kind of accolade? I remember telling a friend of mine years ago, because I think somebody did something similar to Caribbean Lookbook after having followed me for years and like copying my every move and all that, and they were getting like quite a lot of attention and praise, more than I was getting when I started. And I said, I did so much in the beginning. Like I stay up all night and I look for all these designers and where are my accolades? And a friend looked at me and he was like, why do you need it?
Mm.
And I'm like, you're right. And I had to retreat and do that, go back into myself and just figure out, okay, where is this coming from? Do you want the accolades because you need some kind of validation for your work, or is doing the work enough validation? So I'm like, oh, okay. And all these, like, people would think I'm insane because I'm having all these conversations with myself, and having that, like, counseling experience at the YFCA is like, okay, it's helpful. But I got to a point where I had to speak to somebody beyond my capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So started therapy, and it's like, okay, great. But just being able to process things differently from a space of what is my why? Why am I doing this? Is it meaningful? Is it going to help? Is it going to hurt? Is it going to contribute to the conversation in a larger way? Is it going to contribute to the culture in a larger way? And is it only going to help one person, or do you see a way where an entire group could benefit from this one move? And that's where I tend to make decisions from now. Because before it was just like, yeah, let's splash out and do thing and, get the numbers and the vanity metrics. But at the end of the day, that don't really matter because it's short-lived.
Yeah. The image I'm getting as you're talking is this ripple, like a drop that becomes a ripple, as opposed to a drop that just completely disappears and is just engulfed by what exists.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
how does it reverberate? And I guess that's the inquiry that you're having with yourself right now.
Constantly, yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you if you had the option to go to a meal with anybody that's ever lived, I should say. Where would you go? And I guess two people. You're planning a dinner party with anybody that ever existed. And you can invite two people. Who would they be and where would you go?
Oh my gosh, there's so many people I would choose. I know one person for sure would be my mother, because she passed 13 years ago. But I would want to have a meal with her. And gosh, it's a toss-up of who the next person would be, because I know I would want to have a conversation with Oprah Winfrey at some point. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Oprah.
Okay.
Just her career in media, and her career in terms of helping people and showing up for people and all that, like, is admirable for me, to me. And it's something I tend to measure my impact, even at this scale, I tend to measure my impact according to how she has impacted lives on her larger scale. So ultimately, I'd love to have a conversation with her, yeah. But I'd like my mother to be there too, to keep me in check.
And so when you look out now over the next couple years, what do you look forward to the most? Like, what do you see as the brightest thing?
There's so many different things that are bright on the horizon for me. I'm working on a startup now that feeds into the Caribbean fashion ecosystem. I wish I could say more, but I'm very excited about it. And then with that startup, watching how lookbook evolves and continues to kind of feed into the Caribbean fashion space, how we tell stories better if and more expansively. So that's exciting for me. That's what I want to do. I know that now. I also want to do more work on creative wellness, particularly for creative entrepreneurs and cultural workers, and what that looks like in terms of, outside of the high season and the busy productive season of wire bending and feather making and all that. Like, what does your life look like outside of these peak times? And how can we create a space where you feel supported and you feel like you can make a living outside of a peak season?
Yeah.
Without having to sing soca and travel all over the place.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a wonderful conversation. And can you tell our audience how they can reach out, how they can contact you?
I'm Mel Gabriel. I am founder of Caribbean Lookbook, and you can follow Caribbean Lookbook and me on Instagram at Caribbean Lookbook, on Twitter at Carib Lookbook, on Pinterest. Facebook is Caribbean Lookbook. TikTok is Watch Caribbean Lookbook. And the website, which will be live on July 1st, is CaribbeanLookbook.com. Also rolling out Lookbook Shop at the end of July. So that's exciting. A very curated space because I don't want to just have a thing all over the place. And Lookbook Locals, which is a directory platform that highlights all the creative and lifestyle services providers across the region. So you could search by island if you're looking for a cobbler or makeup artist or a wardrobe stylist or whatever. Yeah,
that's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I am looking forward to all these amazing things that are coming up for you.
I'll keep updated. Like, all of this is like me coming out of recovery, trying to be intentional about just the work and my brand and sharing things, even if I feel like I'm not ready.
Yeah.
Because I've been holding back so much. Lookbook Locals was ready like 3 or 4 years ago, and I just never released it because I wanted it to be perfect. And I'm like, building in public is a thing now. Let me just continue to build it in public. It's fine. You know? So I have to let it go.
Just put it out there.
Yeah, and get feedback and iterate, and that's how things grow and blossom. So that's what we do.
I from a fellow perfectionist, I wanted everything to be just so, but then there's this book, Elizabeth Gilbert wrote this book about ideas. And you are a visionary. I can tell this. I mean, but she wrote this book, and this has happened to me, Mel. Seriously, let me tell you the name of the book. She says in this book that ideas don't belong to anyone. If they go from person, and I'm paraphrasing majorly, but if they it's called big magic.
Big magic.
If you come up with an idea that's in your mind and you don't act on it, it will move on to someone else.
Wow.
This has happened. I have seen this happen in my life where 10 years ago, I'm like, oh yeah, I should do this, but, and then 10 years later, somebody's doing it.
Yep.
So it's like, like you said about Lookbook, that was an idea before its time. I'm sure that's not the only one that you've had that's before its time.
True.
So it's not, we have to be intentional, I think, too, but just responding to that call within us is so critical. Being in flow.
I love it.
Yeah.
So more flow for me this year, especially, and I'm looking forward to sharing.